Welcome back to Extrovert, the podcast designed to help you and your life group put down deeper roots relationally and spiritually. This week I'd like to answer the question, what do you do about the unruly member in your small group? What do you do about that person who just cannot keep their mouth shut? The person who is conflict driven, who makes an argument out of everything? The person who is so overly opinionated that nobody else feels safe sharing? Or the person that is so needy that everything always becomes about them? What do you do? How do you help them to become a part of your group and to really engage fully in a way that is beneficial to the group? Well, step number one is to get your own heart right. Matthew 5:44 records Jesus telling his followers in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." If I can look at you through the eyes of Jesus, then I treat you with far more love and grace than I would under my own power. And the trick to doing that is to begin to ask for God's blessing, God's will on this person. It is amazing that I have just recently discovered that if I have somebody I have a really hard time getting along with, if I can pray even a handful of times that God would bless them. God bless this person today. Show them your love. Show them who you are. If I can do that even a handful of times, it changes the way I see them and it changes the way that I treat them. And so if you're having a hard time in your own heart with a member of your group, just start to pray for them. Pray for God's blessing. Don't pray that God would fix them. God take all those terrible things about them and make them right. But God bless them. Love them. Show yourself to them. You'll be amazed at how it changes the way that you think about that person. And then once your own heart is right, you'll be able to practically walk through a few steps that can help them become a contributing part of the group. One of the first things you want to do in your group with somebody who is super dominant, that overwhelms conversation, is you want to get them on your side as an ally. You're going to use them and their comfort to draw other people out. And so you may pull this person aside and say, you know what, I've noticed you're very, very comfortable here sharing, and I would love if you could use that to help some of the other people in our group. Have you noticed, for instance, that so-and-so doesn't really talk a whole lot? Could you help me, as we're having this conversation, to get them engaged in it? Instead of sharing your own thoughts, can you turn to one of these quieter people and say, we haven't heard from you in a while. What do you think about this? And get them on your side in drawing other people into the conversation. It gives them a purpose. It gives them a sense of belonging, which is a lot of what they're looking for in sharing so much anyways, but it does it in a positive manner. You also want to challenge this person to stretch. A lot of times the loud and the opinionated people, I know because I'm one of them, they have a hard time receiving rebuke. And so you can creatively get them to recognize themselves and their own flaws and their own shortcomings and their own struggles by putting a challenge before them. So you might pull somebody aside and say, you know what, I've got a challenge for you this week. I know that we're going to talk about some things and you're going to have this incredible idea or you're going to have this whole argument that you're just totally willing to share, but I'm going to challenge you this week that rather than saying it, that you be quiet and you only listen to what everybody else says. And so we're not saying, you know what, you're always wrong or you talk too much. We're saying, I want to challenge you to listen this week. I want you to bury yourself and to see if there's something that you can learn from other people. Another thing that you can do is you can invite them to share those thoughts away from the group. If you have time or if you have an opportunity either before the group or maybe after a group, you'll sit down with this person and say, you know what, I know you've got a ton of thoughts on this, and I would just like to hear what you're thinking about it. As they do this, then, after you finish your conversation, you can look ahead and you say, you know what, you have a ton of stuff to say, and we just spent like an hour talking about it. So obviously, if you share all those things at our group, it's not going to leave a whole lot of time for the rest of the people to contribute. But I just want you to pick like the most important 2 or 3 things that you can share this week. I hope that's been helpful to you as we turn towards this week's content. Just a great sermon, a great illustration of the difference in rebellion between 2 sons. We've got one who is just shameless about it. He just says, you know what, I'm all about my own business, so Dad, get lost, I don't want you. And then we've got the older brother who in a much more subtle way says, this has really always been about me. And I don't care about you, Dad, and I don't care about my brother. I just want to make my own rules and do my own thing in the hopes that it will get me what I want. And for a lot of us, I would venture a guess that if you're here in a life group, that you're more tempted to fall into the latter. Where you're more tempted to say, you know what, I've done these good deeds, and so God, you owe me this. Make my life awesome. Or we're in it for what we'll get out of it. It's a very harmful and rebellious place to be because it puts us at the center of the universe rather than God who belongs there. I have you look in 2 Samuel at the story of David and Bathsheba and their adultery and the murder of Uriah the Hittite. It's a crazy story, especially when you consider that David is one that God said, here's a man after my own heart. It's incredibly powerful for us to look at a guy who, if he showed up in the movie, would be the most hated villain ever. The guy who sleeps with somebody else's wife and then murders him to cover it up. It's just a terrible story. We look at the depth of God's forgiveness, and even though David and Bathsheba were punished, they suffered for their sin and the death of the child that they had, still God's mercy was greater. And God brought redemption and forgiveness to David and Bathsheba. And so I encourage you, as our perspectives as Christians tend to subtly shift to this attitude of, I'm doing enough, I'm being good enough, I'm earning for myself favor. And along with that, the mentality that my status as a Christian depends on how perfect I am. We really tend to fall into the trap of the Pharisee. But I want you to consider instead this week saying, what in my life have I not confessed, have I not admitted to? Because even in my own heart, I have a hard time admitting to myself that I am still that sinful. What is it that before God you need to say, you know what, God, I don't deserve anything. I am a miserable sinner. But your grace is so much better. But your grace is so sufficient. But your forgiveness is so sufficient. And so please, God, forgive me. And let my value depend on your love for me and not on what I deserve. It's a powerful message for Easter, the redemption, the cost at which Jesus went to bring us into life. So it's been good to see you again this week. I will catch you here next week. God bless.